it's important to pre-assess before you start implementing the solutions, to pre-assess like the direct benefit or like the flood reduction, but then also the co-benefits or potential disbenefits, to have like a bit better idea of what could be the best solution.
Welcome to the Case for Conservation podcast, where we explore biodiversity conservation and the environment more broadly and interrogate conventional wisdom for the sake of a more robust case for conservation. I'm your host, Andre Mardo. One of the most popular terms in conservation these days is nature-based solutions. The concept is centered around the various ways in which conservation, including restoration and sustainable use, can benefit society, economy, and the environment. NbS are alternatives to engineered solutions to these problems, which benefit people as well as nature. Sounds straightforward, and the concept has been taken up in government policy and largely embraced by conservation science. And yet it has been somewhat divisive for very different reasons. Joy Ommer is scientific lead at KAJO, a Slovakia-based geoservices consultancy focused on disaster risk reduction and management. In a recent paper, she and some project partners write about the importance of understanding the impact of nature-based solutions before they're actually implemented. We discussed this and other issues around the NbS concept. I began by asking Joy to define nature-based solutions.
If I would tell it to my grandma, nature-based solutions are kind of, we take the ideas from nature to kind of restore or conserve the nature, kind of bringing back the nature to its original stage. But then I think one of the main points of nature-based solutions is also that we kind of try to address societal challenges. Well, not only societal challenges, but also economic and environmental challenges. So one main challenge is climate change, climate mitigation, disaster risk reduction, which is also my field. But of course, also societal challenges like everything related to sustainable development goals in terms of health, for example, economic challenges. And then, of course, one big area is also the biodiversity loss. So this is one of the main environmental challenges we are facing. So maybe in a nutshell, it is trying to protect or conserve or restore or just sustainably managing our different ecosystems. We talk about different ecosystems like terrestrial or freshwater, coastal marine ecosystems. But at the same time, kind of addressing these societal, environmental, economic challenges.
Right. And this is maybe a small point, but kind of an interesting one from my side. Your definition, I think, is quite well aligned with the UNEP definition. But you mentioned that one of the societal challenges is biodiversity loss, right? And I agree that that's a societal challenge. But isn't that like kind of circular reasoning? Because it's like you're conserving nature in order to conserve nature, if you're talking about the biodiversity loss aspect. So is there some reason for including that as a societal challenge, or isn't that the kind of basis for it all?
Yeah, I mentioned it as an environmental challenge.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, it is also part of the Sustainable Development Goals. So in this way, it's kind of, I think, also a societal challenge to make sure that we preserve biodiversity or enhance biodiversity where it was degraded. So in a way, it's a bit of a societal challenge because we as a society have to try to regenerate the biodiversity. But on the other hand, it's, of course, mainly an environmental challenge.
In your paper is it the International Journal of Disaster Risk Reduction? Have we got the name right? So in that article, which is how I found you, you talk about NbS as being, well, the impression that I got from the article is that your view of NbS is that it's limited to disaster risk related solutions. So is that the case, or is it broader than that? Because I'm also thinking about for example, something like in a city, an urban concrete canal being reconverted back into a stream or something like that. It's kind of like an aesthetic solution. It's not something that's critical to human well-being, but it's presumably that also falls under the umbrella of NbS, right? Is your focus on disaster risk related solutions, is that just because that's kind of your field?
Yes, exactly. So I have been mainly focusing on disaster risk reduction, but you can see, or you can look at nature-based solutions from different angles. And this is also maybe one aspect on how to define nature-based solutions, because you implement the nature-based solutions for a specific aim. So in our project, it was linked to the H2020 Operandum project. And there we were focusing on disaster risk reduction of different hazards, like flooding. So this would be going in line with the example you just mentioned. In this case, it also has kind of side effects on health. So if we renaturalize the river, it reduces the likelihood of flooding, or maybe reduces the flooding level. So in this way, it can also have an impact, like a side effect on health and well-being.
Right. But I guess the point is that it's still regarded as a nature-based solution, even if flooding reduction is not part of, even if it's purely aesthetic, that's still regarded as under that umbrella, that broad umbrella, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, nature-based solutions is kind of an umbrella term for different methods, approaches, like ecological restoration, ecosystem-based adaptation, green infrastructure, water infrastructure, blue infrastructure. So it's kind of just an umbrella term for all these different approaches. It makes it easier to communicate it also.
Yeah, and it kind of amazes me, this term came up very recently. How long ago did it really start to circulate widely?
I would say 5 to 10, maybe 10 years. It became more popular.
Yeah, and previously, as far as I know, as far as I can remember, the term ecosystem-based adaptation was the closest thing that we had to an umbrella term like nature-based solutions, right? But that was pretty specific. That was talking about using nature for adaptation to climate change. It's quite a specific focus, although sometimes it extended beyond that, but that was really the main focus. So on the one hand, I'm amazed that it took so long to come up with a good name for this concept, and I think it's great that we've done that. But would you agree that this is not a new concept, even if it's a new formulation of the concept, that the idea has existed for a long time? And based on that, how important do you think it is that we have this term now, which is an umbrella for all of these different solutions?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's not a new concept, but it's, as I said before, it's just an umbrella term for all these kind of concepts and approaches which have existed before.
Mm-hmm.
But it just covers them under one idea, one overall concept of restoring the nature or preserving it. I think it is actually nice that they invented this term, because it's a more easy to understand term also, like
Mm-hmm.
nature-based solutions. So we have solutions which are based on the nature, so kind of the ideas from nature. And it's easier to communicate it like globally. Like it's just easier to promote it also, I think, especially in the European Union. It has been promoted largely, and everyone is kind of working with nature-based solutions. But of course, they're working in different contexts or with different aims, like disaster risk reduction or biodiversity loss or climate change adaptation. So I think it really helps to just promote the overall idea of nature-based solution.
Yeah, there's a reason why corporations spend so much on advertising, right? And on having really like pithy concepts and images and catchphrases and that kind of thing.
Mm.
So I guess like the main part of the discussion from my point of view is what I'd like to do is to kind of critique the concept a little bit. And what's interesting, I think, is that the critiques come from two completely different directions, or the two main critiques, and I might be missing others. You can maybe fill me in there. But I'm curious what you think about these kind of opposing critiques. And the one of them, just to summarize, feel free to, again, to modify my summary, but to summarize, the one argument against using this concept is that NbS or nature-based solutions are too people-centric, and they de-emphasize the importance of conservation for its own sake. And this is exactly the same argument as the argument against using ecosystem services as a concept, or nature's contributions to people, the sort of IPBES-related version thereof. So that's the one kind of critique of it. This was actually brought up by a guest of mine on the podcast a while ago. He doesn't like the concept at all for that specific reason. And then the other one, which I think is more nuanced and maybe a little bit more complex, is that the critique is that we should be thinking about the best solution, not the best nature-based solution, and especially in the context of communities. So, if we're talking about what to do about a canalized stream, there are no sort of major consequences or something like that. But when you're talking about marginalized communities, for example, they need the best possible and the quickest possible solution, usually the quickest possible solution, also a sustainable solution, of course, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But the critique then is, shouldn't we be looking at the best solution and not necessarily trying to find the best nature-based solution if there's an engineering solution which is better? You can take those one by one, or you can contrast them however you'd like to tackle that.
Yes, thanks. I will go one by one, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, indeed, I think and nature-based solutions are very people-centric, which I think is also, but this is me more guessing, the origin of this kind of marketing of nature-based solution, which has happening in the past 10 years, maybe. So as we said earlier in the definition of nature-based solutions, they are also there to address societal challenges. So in this way, these solutions, even though we focus on them in like the disaster risk reduction, for example, the main direct benefit would be the reduction of, for example, flooding. Mm-hmm. But then we have a lot of side effects, and these are usually called the co-benefits of nature-based solutions.
The positive side effects, right?
Exactly, yes. And these are a bit like, if you think about the co-benefits, they are kind of the slogan of nature-based solutions. So these are the way how you kind of try to convince people they are good solutions, because it doesn't only help the nature, but you also have some benefits from it. So, for example, if you have like the noise reduction in the city because of the new green area emerging, or like some hedges which are kind of blocking the sound.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's kind of also a benefit for personal health, or it can also have economic benefits, like upgrading areas and so on. Mm-hmm. So I think these kind of co-benefits, they are like very communicated to, which make them also at the same time more people-centric, or to seem more people-centric and more focused on these kind of side effects. But on the other hand, it's also very important to motivate people to promote or to accept these new developments and the restoration and everything. So it is, I think it was kind of, or it's been communicated so much around the co-benefits, and especially the more people-centric ones, like the social and economic ones, to kind of promote them, to motivate people to kind of say they are good in a way for multiple things, for the risk reduction, but also for us as people living around them. Mm-hmm. And also maybe if you think back, so initially the term co-benefits, it was invented in the context of health benefits by the IPCC in the context of climate change mitigation policies. So in a way, it has like a social and maybe a little bit economic origin, this term in general. But I think actually, in fact, that nowadays when there are many projects around nature or nature-based solution projects are kind of assessing or pre-assessing the potential side effects. And I think it is much easier to kind of estimate the ecological side effects, not the social ones. But I think the social co-benefits are still very used to just like promote it and motivate people.
Comparing NbS to the ecosystem services concept. So, as I was saying, the ecosystem services concept has also been criticized by kind of, you could say, the more purists on the spectrum, among conservationists. And the same criticism has been leveled at NbS. I think like maybe there's an argument to be made for the fact that in the case of ecosystem services, the focus is really on nature is good because it does things for us. But with NbS, the focus is kind of more on, okay, we've got problems to solve. And so, not starting from the nature point of view, but just starting from a societal problems point of view and then kind of looking at nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, my sort of little theory that I just came up with now is that the critique of ecosystem services is maybe more viable than the critique of NbS, because NbS is more of like it's coming from a broader perspective. It's not coming from the idea that we must conserve.
Yes. So yeah, as the name of the nature-based solution says, it's a solution for something. So in this sense, we are really like, these are solutions to tackle some challenges, issues. While the ecosystem services, there can be also actually some benefit or co-benefit of nature-based solutions. So I wouldn't kind of put them on the same level, but they are rather connected.
Right. And actually, something I was going to ask you earlier on was just to kind of confirm that the opposite or the alternative to nature-based solutions are basically summarized as engineering solutions, right? Does that more or less cover everything that's not a nature-based solution, or are there other categories? As far as I understand, it's just those two very broad categories, right?
Yes, usually it's more classified in these two categories. While I must also say that maybe this is also a bit a critique on the marketing of nature-based solutions, that nature-based solutions are sometimes, the term is a bit like, it's elastic. So you can bend it towards a bit more towards engineering solutions. For example, there's the term hybrid solutions, which is like a mix of engineering and nature-based solutions. So in this sense, I think nature-based solution, since it's also this umbrella term of many different approaches, it doesn't have clear borders.
Mm-hmm.
But I think overall, we differentiate between engineering solutions like building a dam made of concrete or whatever material, to like renaturalizing a river.
Mm-hmm.
So in this sense, it's kind of, these two terms are the main ones used.
Mm-hmm. And everything in between, basically, sort of a continuum.
Yes. So maybe this also links to your second question or second critique, actually.
Mm-hmm.
What is the best solution? So it's really difficult to say what is the best solution, or like the term, this is the best solution, because we have to always consider like, what are we aiming for? Why do we implement this? Do we implement it to reduce the disaster risk? Or do we implement it to preserve biodiversity? Or do we implement it to provide water sources for people in need of water? So it's always that you have to really think about the context and to say this is the best solution. So I think I wouldn't say something is the best solution, to be honest.
Yeah, I think about this and this is very theoretical, but I'm thinking about it at a practical level where, you got sort of a project proposal or just a straightforward project. Someone's on the ground, they need to deal with a particular issue, right? But actually, maybe the project proposal focus is a good one, because that's where you have time to plan, you have time to think about like, how are you going to do this? And if, for example, a call for proposals goes out to fix especially a community-oriented problem, let's say a remote community that has water management issues, that might be one of the most common ones, or also energy management. They don't have electricity and they need electricity as quickly as possible and in the most efficient way possible. Depending on where you're coming from, you're probably going to, if you're coming from more of a nature-based solutions kind of background, conservationist or some kind of other environmental field, then you're likely to favor those solutions. And if you don't come from that realm, then you're probably likely to go for an engineering solution.
Mhm.
And it's partly just what you're familiar with, but then also partly what you want to promote. And I wonder whether or how often it happens that communities could be benefited a lot more from a solution that's not taken, because it doesn't go with the person's expertise or their preferences. So I don't know if you have any experience with that kind of on the ground situation, but even from a theoretical point of view, don't you think that that's something that we need to be concerned about?
Yes, so definitely it should be a bit more objective decision. And I think this is why one of the main strengths, maybe, if I can say, of nature-based solutions is, or the approach of nature-based solutions is that they try to incorporate the community in the decision-making of what is the best solution for them.
Mm-hmm.
So there are, for example, different ways like multi-criteria decision-making approaches in which the citizens or the local authorities or whoever is involved in the project can have their voice heard and can kind of say which are the elements which we want to address, which are, I don't know, limitations or anything. So in this sense, nature-based solutions that's what it's also maybe you can say is more people-centric because they usually try to involve the community to find the best solution for their problem so that it's not top-down decision making.
Right. But I can also see a lot of room for people in the community just being convinced that a particular solution is the best solution. If they don't know what the options are, or if they are maybe just not given all the choices that they might want to, especially again when funding is involved. Let's say you are coming at it from a conservation point of view, the funding is pretty much demanding that you take a nature-based solution. If you then find out that the community would be better off with an engineered solution or an engineering solution, then what do you do? I've never heard of, I'm sure it's happened, but I've never heard of a situation where the project implementers then say, "Oh, okay, well, we need to start from scratch, or we need to give up this funding stream. This community would be better off if someone else helped them." So, yeah, I'm just still a little bit skeptical about whether this best solutions versus best nature-based solutions, whether that's always done in the right way.
But I think it's also like if you think about best solution, it's also you have to understand also the impact of the solution. So, of course, if you want to reduce the flooding, sorry that I'm always bringing up the same
No, it's a good example. Yeah.
So if you want to reduce flooding, maybe an engineering solution is better or in the way that it can prevent like more intense floodings. So you have to kind of assess what is the direct impact or the direct benefit of the solution compared to remeandering the river. So, and this is I think the weak point in nature-based solutions at the moment, that they are not pre-assessed or the impact is not pre-assessed, that we can say, okay, this solution is really better because it can lower the flooding risk far more than this other solution. And this also goes on to think about the co-benefits. No one is really reassessing the co-benefits. And here we also have to think about the disbenefits. So not all the solutions are bringing co-benefits. Sometimes a co-benefit can be also turned into a disbenefit. For example, if you plant an avenue of trees, sometimes it rather blocks the air pollutants and kind of raises the air pollution level instead that it lowers the air pollution level. So, and I think this is also what we try to say in our paper, that it's important to pre-assess before you start implementing the solutions, to pre-assess the direct benefit or the flood reduction, but then also the co-benefits or potential disbenefits, to have a bit better idea of what could be the best solution. And here we need to also think a bit about like maybe what is a significant impact. Like, for example, one author suggested like a 5% per decade rule. So if you improve something by 5% in one decade, then it's a significant change. But then on the other hand, we also have to think about the short and long-term impacts, whereas maybe some nature-based solutions are more of longer term or have longer term impacts, like positive impacts or benefits, than a dam which breaks after, I'm sorry, I'm not an engineer, but after 30 years or 100 years. So we have to think also within a long-term perspective to see what is the best solution. Like if you plant trees now, they might need to grow at least 5 years so that you actually see the impact or you can quantify the impact. So you have also this kind of difference. And then also, of course, in a spatial way, you have to see if I plant a tree here now, does it help the whole city or is it helping only the 10 meters around it? So there are like so many points to kind of consider and to pre-assess also, or to know in advance to decide what is the best solution.
There's a bit of a toss-up between urgency and importance there as well, right? That time factor is really interesting. So, the examples that I gave are kind of imagining communities, which, I mean, it could also be health-related issues where, it's really urgent. You just got to get some kind of solution going as soon as possible. But that might not be the best solution in the long term. So you're probably not looking at just one solution in cases like that. But I noticed in the paper you spoke a lot about pre-assessment. Can you just explain what you mean by pre-assessment? Are you talking about understanding the benefits of a nature-based solution versus its alternative, versus its engineering alternative? Are you actually comparing the different possibilities?
Yes, exactly. So many scholars, they are working on assessing the impact of nature-based solutions. But this is like after the project, or they're either monitoring, they're implementing the solution, and then they're monitoring the impact. And then they can say afterwards what was the improvement. But to be sure this is the best solution, you also need to know in advance what is going to be the impact. So you need to have a kind of an estimation of the impact. And this is what we talk about when we talk about pre-assessment.
I would imagine that's something that happens quite rarely, right? It's usually you kind of rush to get the funding and then you implement this project, which the researchers kind of theorize is going to be the best way to deal with the situation.
Exactly.
So what do you kind of recommend? I mean, what are your suggestions or your options for researchers to take, and especially if, as funding cycles work, and maybe I'm thinking too much in terms of funding cycles, maybe we should think more in terms of sort of national priorities, right? I guess that's where your focus is aimed more. You can let me know if I'm wrong there, but how do you influence that tendency to kind of come up with an idea and then try it out and learn while doing, rather than what you're talking about, rather than this pre-assessing approach?
It's a difficult question. I think, well, on the one hand, I think it's important to know the impact in advance, or the potential impact in advance. It's important to integrate the community, the local community, so have like more local focus. Integrate the local community in the decision-making process. Also integrate them in kind of building the nature-based solution, so that they kind of gain some sort of ownership and they are more likely to accept these kind of solutions and like feel the benefit of it, or believe in the benefit of it. But it's really, I think, as you said, like if you think about proposal writing, it's often already like said in advance, okay, we will build this solution there. But then probably we haven't talked with the communities yet, or haven't done any pre-assessment. So I think in this way, it's a bit difficult for project managers or coordinators to do the proposal stage, because you have to really then also if you stay, you implement this nature-based solution, you have to stick to it. Of course, sometimes you can do amendments to the proposals, but it's really like I don't know, like a circle of devil. How do you call it?
Yeah, I know what you mean. So, I mean, is that paper aimed more at maybe the national governments and other funders rather than the researchers themselves? Because this is like quite a big picture thing, actually, right? It's sort of more, it sounds like what you're advocating is a principle, a different way of approaching these solutions. And I think, I mean, I completely agree, partly because just like the term is relatively new, even though the concept is not that new, the actual trialing of the concept is fairly new, right? At least from a blanket perspective, you don't always know. In fact, you probably don't normally know whether a nature-based solution is going to be the best option in a particular situation. So, are you kind of advocating for this being something which is, a principle applied from governments on down, or is it more something that researchers can actually have an impact on?
It is both. So firstly, we want to kind of set this principle that you think about the impact in advance. But on the other hand, the paper is so structured that it should guide the project managers through the pre-assessment phase. And also it should align a bit in the European Commission or in European projects. We often have this environmental impact assessment, which is kind of a pre-assessment, and there's a kind of checklist for it. But it doesn't go into detail into how do you actually pre-assess the impact on health, for example, or how do you, if you think about a specific benefit, co-benefit, how do you actually pre-assess the, let's see, the change in property values or the tax revenue or any other kind of benefits. So that's what we try to aim with the paper, to kind of write the recipe to do this pre-assessment.
Apart from the community, and I can understand why community consultation is so key because, well, basically no one is likely to know better what they need than they themselves, right? So I guess, and also I guess it's also a case of even if you are pretty sure that you know better, there's a culpability issue there, right? If you implement a particular solution and that's not the one that the community wanted, then people are unlikely to do that because you could get into serious trouble if it turns out to be the wrong one, even if you were sure in the beginning. But apart from community consultation, what else can you do in terms of pre-assessment with such a broad topic?
Well, basically assess all the impacts, I think, and then communicate it. I mean, actually, now we have been talking about it sometimes, and I have to, or this one memory came up in my mind from my master's studies. We were in a group work, and we had to define a project. Like it was I think the course was project management. So we had to define a project and all the steps and everything. And we had one person from, I think from Congo in the group. And he was like hammering on this one engineering solution. And the other people from the group, we were more like focusing on soft solutions for vulnerability reduction. So it was really like a conflict all the time, even though he was the person from the focus area. But we were still maybe too subjective to think that this is the only, or we were saying this cannot be the only solution to drill boreholes everywhere. So it was really I think we have mentioned or come up with this before. So we have this kind of subjective ideas from the project managers, for example, and then we have the idea from the local communities. And sometimes people believe that this is better. Sometimes the community might be wrong. I don't know, if they only know about certain solutions and they don't know about whole spectrum of solutions which can be implemented.
That example sounds very much like one of the short-term versus long-term, right? You need a short-term solution, and maybe a borehole is the best way to do that. But 10 years later, you want to see something more sustainable in place, I guess. So you're going to have more than one solution
Yes.
in that case. I guess, I mean, from that point of view, I totally understand the idea of hybrid solutions or combined solutions. It seems to make sense because situations are complex and every example is a bit different to the last, right? So each one probably has sort of a different recipe that's needed.
Mhm.
You also spoke about, and this is sort of maybe the last thing to bring up, you also spoke about disservices or disbenefits, was the word that you used, right?
Yes.
And you mentioned trees trapping pollution, so trees that are planted for, I guess, various purposes, but one of them might be to prevent pollution, but end up sort of trapping it. And there's a bunch of others. I actually just was sort of reminding myself of some of these, and just to have a quick list for the listener and maybe also for you. So some of the potential disservices of nature are disease transmission, and this is something that can work, but in fact, most of these can work both ways, just like the trees. In some situations, they can be good, in some situations, not so good. And in the case of disease transmission, there's lots said about the fact that deforestation is linked to disease transmission. In other cases, it's the opposite, that clearing of vegetation can actually help to reduce disease transmission in the case of tsetse fly and mosquito borne diseases and that kind of thing. Anyway, and there are others like crop damage from animals, allergen production, livestock loss, damage to property, danger to human life, which, I mean, to me, that's kind of it's something so far from our realities, but for many people, the possibility of being taken by a crocodile when you go and collect water is a very real one, and it's something that's coming from South Africa myself. I've never had to run that kind of risk, but I'm very aware that it's a daily risk for a lot of people. And then other things like water quality degradation, plant overgrowth, soil erosion, again, that can work both ways. Flooding also can work both ways, and damage to infrastructure. So that's just kind of a preliminary list, but there are lots of things that nature does that we don't want it to do. That's kind of what it boils down to. So I don't really have a very specific question, but can you say something about the disbenefits and maybe how to manage those? In this sort of concept of nature-based solutions that we're trying to promote, how do we deal with the fact that these disbenefits exist?
Yes, so I think also in the sense of co-benefits, it's important to know the extent of these disadvantages and to be actually aware of these benefits or potential disbenefits, because this is also one of the issues of nature-based solutions, that they're kind of a bit like greenwashing. They only talk about the co-benefits, but never really about the disbenefits.
Mm-hmm.
So that if you build a pond, it might increase the risk of mosquitoes breeding there. So this is kind of like one of the main critique points, I think, also of nature-based solutions, that they are kind of greenwashed. So I think it's important to firstly be aware of which kind of disbenefits there can be for a certain solution. Secondly, it's important to also pre-assess the extent of this, and then eventually think about solutions to prevent or lower these kind of disbenefits if they are kind of, for example, threatening our health or other things like economic impacts, like I think you mentioned the animals destroying the crops, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. So the pre-assessment is not just about comparing nature-based solutions and engineering solutions, but also about, it's not just looking at the pros of each, it's looking at the cons of each as well, right?
Definitely, yeah. And when the pros can turn into cons also.
Right. Yeah, I think also that greenwashing issue is something which comes up again and again in discussions that I've had, including on the podcast. And I'm convinced that credibility of concepts like NbS are in danger if we are not completely honest about them. And I think that's kind of the whole ethos behind this podcast, is that I think that a lot of people get very uncomfortable when you start critiquing concepts like this because they're considered to be good concepts, right? And the idea is if you critique them from the inside, especially if you're a conservationist yourself and you critique them, then what are people going to think from the outside? They're going to think you think it's not worthwhile. But I think that you just have to be willing to do that. You have to be willing to critique things and strengthen them especially from the inside, from within this field of ours. So, yeah, I think that the credibility of nature-based solutions is going to depend a lot on how open we are about the pros and the cons and the comparisons with engineering solutions, the benefits and the disbenefits.
Yeah, I think we have to be but I think we have to be honest about the core benefits, but also the disbenefits, and we have to raise the awareness of both, and not only the core benefits. It doesn't mean that we cannot implement a nature-based solution because there are some disbenefits, but it means that we need to be aware of these disbenefits and think about how to address these if needed.
Next time, I'll be talking to Mika Tan about the role of youth and other major groups in global discussions and decisions about the environment. This was a really lively discussion that dug into various nuances of major group involvement, especially involvement of youth. And I think that many of you will find it as interesting as I did. I hope you can join us.